it's an honor to present Ben. Ben is awesome. He's been doing Purple Team. Like I mentioned, I met him last year at the inaugural Purple Team Summit. He was doing a talk there. Fantastic work. And I'm really interested in this talk because this talk is about a global team. When you only have a little bit of time, can you still run a Purple Team exercise? And Ben will do his intro, but he's doing some awesome work over at Kimberly-Clark. So appreciate you, Ben. Thank you for being here, and go ahead and take it away.
Sure. Well, I don't have a really cool unicorn outfit, but I do have a nice FBI hat. They have a gift shop if you ever get to go, and it scares the crap out of kids in the neighborhood if you come out shouting "Get off my lawn" with an FBI hat. Really works great. So thank you guys for staying. Really happy to talk about what we've been working on within my team. So as mentioned, we have a global Purple team. Kimberly-Clark is a big multinational company, Fortune 200. We operate in basically every country in the world, and our security team is distributed over just about every country in the world, every continent anyway. So we have Purple teamers in Israel, Purple teamers in India, Purple teamers in the US, and a variety of other places. And getting all those folks together is a nightmare, as you might imagine. So we were looking at everything that came out of last year's Purple Team Summit and all these ideas about how to do a day-long or a week-long session, and just thinking this is not really going to fit our model very well. So we decided to come up with some ideas to address that. That's where we've really been working on this concept of a 1-hour Purple Team exercise, and just wanted to demo what we've done and how we've tried to speed things up. So in what we'll cover today, first, just going through the objectives. If you guys need to go grab a cup of coffee, this is when you can pick out the parts that you want. We'll define the objectives. We'll go through the threat intel part. Then we'll go through the red team, blue team, and then all the documentation that we generate, which is pretty lightweight, and it's really more of a guide. Hopefully will help you guys. So first, we start obviously with attack alignment, as most of you guys will. Somebody just mentioned Vector. Vector is an awesome tool for that. If you don't have the time to invest in that, you can also just start with a spreadsheet. But at the end of the day, we're trying to make sure we have good coverage across a variety of techniques, trying to make sure that really we've done our due diligence, not just in terms of assessing whether we're good at something, but really testing it. The way we approach Purple Team is maybe a little less adversary emulation focused and a little more technique focused. Obviously, in an hour, we're not going to do an end-to-end, adversary emulation of what an adversary themselves might take days or weeks to do. We're kind of taking a little micro segment of that. But we do align to attack and building a heat map from it. The first tip is, and the feedback we got from our executives is, well, that's great, but I don't want to start with this gray map that shows me nothing, and I don't want to wait 2 years before I actually have this thing populated. So the first thing that we tackled was, how do we begin from someplace more than just a blank canvas? And the quickest way to achieve that was to self-evaluate first. And here you'll see the link in the bottom, but Malware Archaeology has some really great Windows attack alignment sheets where you can go through these examples of the MITRE attack techniques and where you may have data. And it's just a really good baseline list of what Windows events you have. And then there's also a sprinkling of other data sources that would be relevant. So it's a great place to begin a self-evaluation. So we were able to kind of start here, get a self-evaluation of where do we think we are, and from there begin to test it with Purple Teaming. So trying to achieve a Purple Team exercise in 1 hour is not super easy. First, just obviously there's less time, which is a pro and a con. On the pro side, it's less time commitment. We were able to get everybody in the room, able to get 3 continents into a single session. It's certainly easier to start. You're not having to bump into everybody's calendars as much. not having to answer these huge time commitments. And if somebody misses one, it's not always that big a deal, because being able to spread it across all these continents, bring the whole team together, there's a lot more depth. So if somebody's out one session, they can be there the next. So it's just practically a lot better on the timing side, obviously, right? It's an hour. Also, fail fast and continuously improve. So if you are looking at sort of an agile methodology, sorry, I don't mean to get all, preachy on that stuff, but basically, don't put all your eggs in one basket for one big test and have it not go as well as you want. You can do a little test, check and adjust. And we definitely adjusted after our first session. Some things worked well, some things didn't. I'm going to try and share what worked for us, but obviously every environment's different, and doing it in 1 hour time chunks really helps you, figure out what works in your environment, what doesn't. Also, the different time zones thing is obviously a huge benefit, as mentioned, not just because of the practicality of scheduling the meeting, but because it gets everybody involved. And we really did not want to be leaving out whole continents, whole team members, or trying to deal with doing an AM session 1 month and a PM session the next month, or any of that. Having it in 1 hour chunks gives us the ability to pick a time that works for pretty much everybody globally and stay consistent. Of course, on the downside, there's not a lot of time. You can't really do a full end-to-end adversary emulation in an hour, is what we found. We have not been successful at going beyond one technique per session, per 1 hour session. That said, you can stack up a lot of sessions in a month if you want to. It's easy enough to do that, but you're not sitting down, hands on keyboard all the way through the kill chain. You're sort of picking a place, testing it, and getting everybody that exposure. So it's admittedly limited as a technique, but it's a great way to get started. So picking techniques, this is where we start to switch into the threat intel piece. First, if you have threat actors that you already know about, that you already track, go use them. MITRE has some really awesome resources for the technique mapping. There's also other sources where you can find technique mapping to specific threat actors if you have those that you follow. If you don't have those that you follow, this is a great excuse to go pick some. At very least, you're going to see I start with all the fin threat actors here, because most organizations have some basic financial ransomware exposure. Maybe you're not a nation state target, but you are, somebody with enough treasury to go after. So they tend to be sort of the least common denominator, but obviously if your threat model is different, if you know you have a threat actor targeting you, go after them. I argued my purple team talk last year that purple and red team, really in this case blue team, the blue team side and red team can actually have really similar value here. It looks the same when on the red team side you're having the shock of, hey, we've compromised you, but when you can go threat hunt and pull in a relevant actor who's not just no offense to red, but not just pretending to attack your network, somebody who's an actual real life threat, it makes it a little more real, especially if you've had incidents and had executives scared before. So this is a really good opportunity to make it relevant by picking the right actors. And we'll get into a little bit more of how we would do that. Another technique is to use incident response data, and Zena Olson, Cheerio, has done some awesome work on this, presented last year as well, about using different data sources that are available to you. So maybe you don't have a threat intel team, but you do have a managed SOC or someone who's giving you some sort of reporting about what samples were seen, what threat actors. If you take those things, in this case, you can take a sample to hybrid analysis and it'll give you a MITRE attack mapping. So you can start with that, and basically I'm saying whatever sources you have, you don't have to rely on formal threat intelligence. You can have really, really operationally focused data, malware samples, IP addresses that are associated with samples and things that you can use your way to get some of that same intel, even if you don't want to touch the threat intel side at all. And then lastly, just use the most common. And I'm going to show you in just a minute. I'm going to tempt the fates here and actually show how some of this stuff works outside of the slide deck. But you can just pick some of the most common techniques, pick some of the most common threat actors. If you literally have no idea where to start with the fin actors and look at what they're doing in common. And with that, I am going to tempt fate and try to share this list. So just a second ago, we referenced MITRE. Obviously, they have excellent mapping. So if you have Fin 7 that you want to go profile, they have a great list of techniques that are already known to be associated with this actor. So all I'm doing here is literally just copying that list, pasting it into Excel, and I've got a few different actors in this sheet. So Fin 8, Fin 6, Fin 7, really basic stuff, right? So then I'm concatenating over here into what's the technique, right? So I've got the overall technique and the sub technique, and I'm concatenating it into a unique one, and then just highlighting that, going into a pivot table, and I need to enable editing, I guess, to get my pivot table. So all I did was take the technique and then a count of times that it appeared in that spreadsheet. And you can see that some of these actors, 3 actors here, all 3 are using T1027. And you can see which ones are most commonly used. And so a great way to show quick value is just to pivot on those, look for the most commonly used among all the samples you have, whether it's formal threat intel, whether it's malware samples. Take that data, pivot on it, and you certainly don't have to, but I would recommend starting at the things that are most common because it's going to give you best bang for your buck. Now, some of you guys are going to crucify me later because that's not emulation, and it's true, that's not emulation. It's getting quick value, and a lot of what I'm saying here is not for the purposes of doing the perfect purple team exercise, but it's to do one that gets alignment and hopefully gets enough interest to then grow your purple team program. So let me switch back to some slides. We just looked at the pivot in Excel. And if you're just too lazy to do that, here's a list. These are some that you will see very commonly. Obviously, PowerShell, a lot of different people use it, a lot of different threat actors. Obfuscated files or information, standard application layer protocols. So we're looking at things like abuse of FTP and just seeing if your SOC would be able to detect these things. Remote file copy, obviously remote desktop protocol, it's everywhere, and new services. And we'll kind of get into the difference shortly on the blue team side about the detective control versus the preventative and the value there. So you may want to consider at this point too a tool selection, like what do I want to test, not just in the sense of can I see it, but am I preventing it? And then if I see it, what am I going to do? I think that all kind of plays into what you want to select. But PowerShell is usually near the top because it's used in an awful lot of attacks, and it's also super simple to test. Some things like social engineering, really hard to test, right? They're not as easily automatable, certainly not easy in a 1-hour session. So this is a great place to start with something technical, and we'll look at some of the tools that Red Team can use to go after those. On this slide. So as Red Team prepares to execute on these things, obviously with 1 hour, you're gonna have to come prepared. And so in a sense, I'm kind of cheating on the 1 hour. It's not 1 hour for everybody. It's 1 hour together and 1 hour block on time. But Red Team is preparing beforehand. Generally, I would say this takes at least a couple hours prep from a decent Red Team to be able to have techniques ready to go, put in the cannon that minute. Specific tools, one idea here is use the tools of your attacker. My Purple Team talk last year at the SANS event was about using literally the tool of one of my attackers just in my environment with me at the controls rather than the attacker. So I think that is a very realistic scenario. It's not hypothetical at all. You're just really using that tool, but the time investment is high, right? Caldera, Atomic Red Team, super awesome tools. What I will say is in my experience, some of those seem to be very technically bent. So it will show you all the technical ways to do something, but maybe not the obvious ways. And you'll see in my example in a minute what I mean by that. But for instance, a lot of those are thinking attack tools, things that are clearly malicious, but not necessarily the things that maybe map to those techniques that aren't as clearly malicious, are going to generate a few more false positives, or just aren't that technical, right? If there's a criticism of Red Team here, it's that a lot of times you want to do the sexy attack, but you don't necessarily want to do the simple attacks, like, for instance, creating a user account. You know, that's not super sexy. It doesn't end up in a lot of these frameworks for Red Team testing, but it is something maybe your Blue Team should be capable of catching. But you know, TLDR version here, come ready to copy and paste, because you will only have an hour and you'll have to scope it appropriately. So the Blue Team will then need to respond, right? So we sit together, we have an hour of hands-on keyboard, Red Team sharing screen usually, and from that, Blue Team will typically take away homework. Now, one thing we've learned is it's really easy for Blue Team to get into the weeds. The first thing all your former SOC guys, your incident responders are going to want to do is dive in, and they're probably going to be really angry if they're anything like ours. Like, how the heck did I miss this thing? You know, maybe I caught 3 out of 4, but the one that I missed, I'm mad about and I'm going to dig into, and that will absolutely blow your timeline. So be prepared to say, you know, awesome initiative, I love where your heart is, but we're going to have to table that, and that's homework. It's just part of what to expect. But when Blue Team takes that homework and goes about their research, you want to focus on some basic questions. First, just the prevention side. You know, was an attack blocked? Why or why not? Great for assessing that aspect. But also the visibility side. Does it even appear in the data? And this is where you don't always want to have something be a black or white decision, like, you know, red won this one, blue lost. Sometimes there's, you know, truth on both sides. So maybe the answer is, you know, the similar didn't happen, or it didn't happen timely, but the data was there to improve it. And the fact that the data is there is showing some Blue Team maturity. So it's not all about one side wins, one side doesn't. There's varying shades here, but just the note, prevention is different than visibility, which is different than alerting. So on the alerting side, you're looking, was there an actual detection? And then after that, was there an actual response? So you just want to go through that life cycle. You know, was the data there? Was it alerted? And did it actually get an effective response that would have stopped a reasonable implementation of that attack? And that, if the answer is yes to all those, then you've really succeeded. And if it's no, then you have some room to improve. It's really that simple. A note here, expect to rewrite a lot of SIM rules. There will be wins, there will be losses on both sides here. And it's just a lot of people think their SIMs are way more mature than they actually are when you get down to testing it. I don't want to, you know, pull back the entire curtain on OPSEC at my company, but there are certainly places where we've seen some room for improvement. And it's usually around, hey, we implemented this data source. We did some sort of alerting on it. We had some thought about it, but we needed to improve it. We needed to extend it, or there was a blind spot, or some logs weren't sending, and here's why. So all that minutia will lead you to reevaluate your visibility, will lead you to rewrite a bunch of content. Blue Team having homework is not always popular. Of course, the prep on Red Team side isn't popular either. So just expect you probably need to do a little follow-up, maybe have a calendar reminder to just say, hey guys, did you finish this? Of course, my Blue Team is amazing, and they do. I'm not trying to call anybody out, but I'm just saying people get busy, people forget. So one of the downsides to a 1 hour exercise is you're not there until it fully wraps up. And so for that reason, just prepare to manage it like you would a series of meetings. So now I'll take you through the documentation we actually generate. And it's really pretty simple. It's just an Excel doc where this is an example, by the way. All this is stripped of all of our personal, all of our specific data. Let me zoom in so it's not quite an eye chart for all you guys. Hopefully you can see that okay. Actually, I'll go just a little bit more. Okay. So obviously date owner, all that basic stuff, objective statement, but then we start with the target systems, and we found in our tests 3 to 4 targets tend to be reasonable, but you do have to really push the pace of the meeting to keep it moving. We like to pick different targets, so maybe you've got an internal server, a DMZ server, and a standard desktop, or maybe you have a couple different versions of desktops. You have a cloud deployed and a traditional domain joined, or one that is an employee desktop and a kiosk. Whatever it is, don't just pick the same three of the same class of machines, because you're not getting the breadth and the value of the test. You just want to diversify that. You can change these, right? It doesn't have to be the same every test. And one thing you're going to see is, PowerShell, for instance, not exclusively Windows, but pretty heavily, right? So we're going to want to test more Windows machines in a PowerShell test than we would Linux. And there are other techniques that go the other way. So expect to vary that, but you're probably going to want to look at 3 to 4. And then a test list. The very first time we did this, our red team came back with like 15 tests they wanted to run, and a lot of them were great tests, and it was really hard to look through there and whittle it down. We found, generally speaking, that that 4 to 5 tests is about the right number for us in an hour. It tends to get your biggest bang for the buck. It tends to cover a decent amount of ground. If you had to vary one or the other, I would put in more tests than more systems, because the setup time to access the systems tends to be a little bit of a holdup. So adding that 4th system, adding one more target system tends to be more time used than adding one more test when you're already on a system. Of course, all that's specific to your environment. If you need to make this a 2-hour test, then all that's out the window, and you can check and adjust to whatever your environment is. But we're trying to stick within that 1-hour window, and 3 to 4 target systems, 4 to 5 tests is what works for us. So the methodology and procedures, we talk about what we're going to do. So in the case of PowerShell testing, the first thing, actually the first 2 tests were ones that were not in really, well, I won't say we looked at all the frameworks for testing, but they weren't in any that we looked at. So adding a local user is really not that super sexy, but it is something you may want to watch out for. So this is where I think you need to probably rely on your red teamers more than some of the testing frameworks, and say, if you were doing emulation, what are the many different steps you would do? And we wanted to sprinkle it. We didn't want it to be all technical controls. We didn't want it to be all, who am I being run and trying to catch that stuff either. We wanted it to be a mix. So the first we started with was this add local user. We're just opening a PowerShell window and then literally copying and pasting in the command. Next is clear event log is another good one. Hopefully you have a detection in your sim for this. If you don't, you're going to learn really quickly. The goal of these is to be able to literally just copy it. And let me tempt fate again. I've got a generic Windows 7 system here, no protections at all. I should be able to just right click in the middle of my test, have the command populate, click enter and go. I've just run a purple team test. I've done the action, and my blue team saw me do it and knows exactly what the context was, knows I'm in an interactive session with a PowerShell window open. The next was getting a little more technical. So this one's straight out of Atomic Red Team's getting started playbook, literally. Open a PowerShell window, run this command. This is not real Mimikatz, it's similar. It does, here you are having to go through the network side too. So there's other elements of techniques, being tested here, and you'll find those as you go. But fundamentally, it's being kicked off from PowerShell. It is listed primarily as a PowerShell test. So again, I go in, paste my command, and hopefully, if everything works here, it's going to download the file and execute it, and I will get a response. Maybe. While that runs, let me go have a peek at the other. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, so it downloaded, successfully executed. Another good tip here is take some timestamps, because you're probably going to forget to populate some of the result sheets, and you'll need to be able to go back and just document how it was done, when it was done, find it in the logs. So just doing a good date in the middle of this and copying and pasting it out is one quick way to do that, just so your blue team has that ease to try and go through it. So let me pull up my document again. That was test 3 running PowerShell or Mimikatz from PowerShell. Test 4 here is an obfuscation test. Basically the same script, but this time it's all obfuscated up. So in my case, hopefully that is going to be successful as well, because oh yeah, there it goes. So we got successful execution. Looks like I may have a typo in the first bit of it, but the second bit did work. So again, with obfuscation, it works. The goal here being if the simple download that doesn't attempt to obfuscate fails, then the second one should work. So we kind of have a tiering to the difficulty going on with our red team here. So that's literally how we sit down and execute the tests, just boom, boom, boom on one system after another. It's not super sexy. It's not super in-depth. I think the red teamers sometimes make it a tad bored. I mean, they're not going to get bored when they just own blue team, right? So there's a little trash talking that happens sometimes, but I think there is a certain amount of boredom that you don't get to go end to end. If you're testing PowerShell execution, you're not doing the big data exfil and doing the big reveal at the end. But we're out there to play ball and do it in an hour here. That's the goal, not trying to unleash the single biggest test. Plus, if we're successful here, again, we're building the momentum for the program to expand it out to those longer sessions to be able to justify more. So this was the 4th test. Oh, there was a 5th test. In this case, I don't have another machine on this test network to go execute against, but here we're going PowerShell creation to other machines in the environment, creating a temp variable and making sure it's retrievable. So just testing that PowerShell connectivity to be able to go laterally instead of just execute on one target machine. So then we get to the documentation part, and really just a simple table. We found that keeping this simple makes it a lot more readable. Our first reaction was to just document. We'd have red team stuff would tend to be pretty short. These are the attacks I ran, boom, 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 and then I leave because I don't have homework. Blue team would take the homework and write 10 pages of how they can improve everything, which is awesome, but makes it a little hard to read. And again, we're trying to take it back and populate that heat map. And 10 pages doesn't populate one cell on a heat map for our executives to see, but it's a little easier to go from this table to that. So we just went attack by attack, and depending on the different servers, did a quick documentation. In this case, maybe we failed user add here, but on the Windows desktops it worked, just a real short summary. And then also you can just read down. So for the Windows server here, maybe it failed, succeeded, failed, failed, succeeded. So we're kind of getting some easier to summarize data on the results of the attack. And then on the defensive side, same thing. Usually you'll have something about whether preventative control worked, was it blocked by policy. Then usually you'll have the element about visibility. So yes, data exists, but did it alert? And then you'll have the third element. Yes, it alerted. No, it didn't. That's basically it. We try and keep it pretty simple there. Obviously, blue team's going to go into a lot more detail. Another thing we learned is our blue teamers are super competitive and they hate losing to red team. And I think a couple of them are probably listening right now because they're probably grinding their teeth to see some of this data come back up and remembering this exercise. But the real win is the fire that those guys have, because I think it took only 1 to 2 days after our first test where we started seeing new sim rules go into place, because these guys were just really pissed off and they weren't going to lose again next time. And you know, they properly validated it. They did everything right, but they were super fired up to go beat red team the next time. I think that's awesome. But at the same time, we're trying to build the camaraderie, right? And at the executive level, this has gone over really, really well. There is that alignment between red and blue. There's not a ton of antagonism. Blue side sees value and red side as well. So it's been popular to bring up at things like our operations meetings, where we'll talk about some of the things that worked well. Some of the things, you know, at summary level, it hits all those audiences well. And then at the end of the day, it produces that beautiful populated MITRE ATT&CK framework. So that's the framework documentation. I haven't thrown that on GitHub, but if you guys are interested, I can. And at this point, I just kind of wanted to ask if there were any questions. Hopefully, I've covered enough to give you guys a good taste of what value we're seeing.